Good afternoon, welcome formally to the session. My name is John Gray, Director of Further Education at EMSI. Sure, I'm looking at the attendee list. I've met quite a lot of you before. What we normally do on these training sessions is go through some background information about EMSI and other things. I'm going to keep that quite short today. I just want to refresh really a couple of points just in terms of the data structure so that we're all working from that same base position within the session. So I'm just going to go through a couple of that and a couple of slides, and then we'll get straight into the session. So first of all, just to look at a reminder of the SIC and SOC code structure. This is, if you remember, this is the structure of the data within our tools. Just want to make sure that we're all starting from the same position here. So standard industry classification codes, you'll know that within our tools we use the SIC and SOC governmental structure. So what we'll see as we work through the tool, a 1-digit SOC code as an example here is construction, and we can work the way down into much more granular level of detail into a 4-digit SOC code. And those of you who've done our sessions before, as you'll know, we generally tend to say start off looking at a broader level of data and then work your way into a much more granular level, and then you can see the best level of insight for your area. So that's an example for SOC. For SIC. If we then just move to SOC, we can look at standard occupation code classification, standard occupation classification. Again, at 1-digit level, we've got a really broad heading, so skilled trades, and then we can move right the way down through to a 4-digit, which would be bricklayers and masons. And the power of this is when we put that all together, along with looking at the geographic detail. So if we're looking at a very localized local authority area, and we're looking at 4-digit SIC and 4-digit SOC, then we know that we're getting into some really meaningful data which we can take insight on, and that there is the power of the EMSI data. So as I mentioned, what we've got this afternoon is analyst and course vision as a training session roll into one. Typically we do these sessions for either or. So please bear with us as we work through this. We have done this a few times now and they've worked fine. So I just wanted to just explain that as we go through. So analyst, this screenshot here is a picture of the Analyst Tool. So for those of you who use Analyst, this is what your tool will look like. And I'm going to talk through this in a bit more detail when we actually log in. For those of you who use Course Vision, then your tool is going to look more like this. So just to explain this, on the left hand side here you have the detailed menu structure in Analyst, and what we have here is the blue highlight just highlighting that we've got Course Vision which is open. So what we're going to do is we're going to base the session really around Course Vision, and the reason why we do that is because we always tend to say start from within Course Vision, and then for analyst customers you will then fire out into other areas of the tool. So for an example here, I've just tried to articulate this on a slide, is start off within Course Vision, and then for those of you who do have Analyst, what you'll then do is click out to go to reports such as Occupation Overview, maybe the industry table or job post analytics. So hopefully that's quite a nice place for us to start for everybody. So what I'm going to do first is we're going to run through Course Vision. We're going to go through the reports in the logical order within there. And then towards the end, we'll get into a few of these more detailed reports for those of you who have the Analyst Tool. If you don't have the Analyst Tools, please stay tuned for that section because you will, I'm sure, pick up some other insights in there. And if we get a chance right at the end, I'm just going to update you quickly on where we are with our COVID-19 data. So you'll have seen that we launched a dashboard for that earlier on in the week. So that's pretty useful to get up to speed with that. So next up, sorry, just pausing there. I just got a message about that somebody could see my the controls on the screen. Hopefully you can see that PowerPoint now, that slide now. So just to skip back to that. So this is just the slide I was talking through previously. So using Course Vision as a tool to start out with. working through the reports in there, and then we'll jump out to these other component parts of Analyst. So just a little bit of context, background information. What we can see here on this slide is just an explanation really of how we're using LMI to inform curriculum planning and strategy. Just think this slide really articulates this and where we're starting. So focus for today is looking at the gathering data section. Clearly all we're doing at this stage is looking at the LMI within our tool. But if you was curriculum planning, if you were undertaking that as an exercise or working on curriculum strategy, then what you would also be doing is you'd be looking at things like the requirements from Ofsted, you'd be thinking about LEP priorities, you'd be getting employer feedback, you'd be getting student feedback, and you'd be rolling all that into one data gathering exercise to kick off your curriculum planning process. So that's where we're really starting out. From there, then that data gathering, it would be rolling out into developing ideas and plans, maybe testing some of those theories, and then implementing some changes. So today, as I said, we're going to look at course vision in more detail. So those of you familiar with course vision, this screen will look relatively familiar in the sense that the headings in these 4 blocks are the 4 reports within the course vision tool. What I'm going to do afterwards is we'll share this slide deck. So what we're trying to do is put this slide together as a bit of an aid memoir for you to use as you work through the tool, so that what we're saying for each of one of these sections, one of these reports, is these are the kind of things that you should be looking at for each one of those areas. So as an example, in economy overview, we'd say run the report for your wider area and then for your local area, and then some prompts there about what does this tell us. What are the areas for growth? What are the areas for decline? What are the in-demand skills? And that we'd complete that part before you move on into the curriculum overview section and so on. So what I'll probably do is just pop back to this a couple of times throughout. But as I say, I will share this slide afterwards so that when you're starting looking at your course vision tool, you can then work through this and work through it in a quite a logical format. Last couple of things on the slides before we jump into Analyst. As we always do on here, just a reminder of where you can get information from. So myself, my email address is on there and phone number. So is Carla's for those of you who have Carla as your account director. And there's also link to knowledge base and help desk, which are also available to provide that kind of help and support as needed. And please, especially in these times, follow our blog and our webinar series. We're doing lots of work on insight around the impact of COVID-19. So please stay tuned to that as well. So I'm just going to close down PowerPoint now. Hopefully everybody can see Analyst. I'm just going to take a quick pause and make sure that everybody can see the Analyst screen. If you just give me a quick comment, make sure you can see that, please. Excellent. So it seems everybody can see that okay. Thank you for just confirming that. So what we have here is we're now in the Analyst tool. This is my Analyst login. So there will be a couple of things on here that some of you can't see in your tools, but not to worry about those. Most of those things are just which colleagues use in the States. So my login has got some of those things on as well. What I'm going to do first is just a little bit of orientation around Analyst, and then we'll do the same for course vision. Hopefully this looks relatively familiar in the sense that this is what the screenshot that we've just looked at in the PowerPoint slides. So a little bit of orientation. Firstly, down the left-hand side, we have the component sections or the modules. So you'll see at the minute the home screen is identified. That's pronounced in blue. Just to note, if you click on the home screen at any time, that will then home button, that will then take you back to this screen. And what you'll see here is that I've already got some reports, some projects which I've saved, and some bookmarks which I've created. And I'll mention how to do that as we work through the session this afternoon. So down the left-hand side, what we've got is each of these sections. So just to click on this as an example, in occupations, as you would expect in here, we've got reports around occupation. And equally, if we looked at things like industries, demographics and regions, they're the component sections. So each one of those areas will have lots of detailed information about that particular thing. So if we're looking at occupations here, we've got things like the occupation overview, and so on. I'm going to get into this a little bit more detail as we move through. Up at the top here, we can access reports as well through this section. Some people prefer to do that rather than down this left-hand menu. We've got the section where we can browse groups. And we've also, importantly, as I mentioned at the back end of those PowerPoint slides, is we've got the support section. So here you can get into knowledge base, you can find out information about Analyst, or you can ask for feedback. Now, just to point out on there where you can actually use, get into the knowledge base. Knowledge base is a really, really useful tool, and often will kind of answer 80 or 90% of your questions when you get stuck on something. Often when you're in the tool and you get stuck on something, it will be, okay, well, what does this mean? What does it tell me? Where does the data come from? And all that information you can find out from knowledge base. One of the things to point out from this screen, just quickly, something that's changed relatively recently for those of you who are in here quite often. If you just go up to the right hand side where you can see my login and click there, what you'll see here is the data run year. So now we're actually in 2020. So that's just the beta version of data. So I've just changed that over now. So the every year, as you'll know, we update the structural government data, and we do that for all the data sources. So what you'll find now in the tool, now we've changed that to 2020. The base year in the reports, such as economy overview, will be 2019, and the projection tool will be now projecting out to 2028. So I'd encourage you to have a look at that and get in there and see what the new year's data is telling us. So that's a quick overview of Analyst. What I'm going to do now is just jump down to Course Vision. So for those of you who have Course Vision, whether you have Course Vision or Analyst, you will be able to access this. So Course Vision, here we've got the 4 reports, the 4 component reports within the Course Vision tool. Again, you'll notice that the structure, the orientation is exactly the same. If we clicked home, we'd go back to that home screen, and so on. So we're going to start off with economy overview. We always suggest to start off from this place. So if you think about it as a wide funnel, we're looking at the top of that funnel, looking at a really broad level of data, finding out what's going on within our region, and then we're going to get much more granular and work our way down through economy overview, curriculum overview, course area snapshot, and through to business case. So if you remember that PowerPoint slide I had earlier, showing those kind of 4 blocks, and what we're going to do is work through each one of those in turn, and show you what data to consider as you're working through that. So we're going to start off with economy overview. Just to show you there, Nathan Port-Talbot, one of the useful tools within Analyst is that once you've been searching for an area or searching for an industry or occupation, it tends to remember that. So this is one that I was looking for a client earlier, and that still remembered me in there. So what I'm going to do, I'm up here in near Sheffield at the moment. As many of you know who know me, I'm from this area. So what I'm just going to do is select Sheffield for the time being. Let's have a look at what's going on in there, and then we'll pick a couple of different variations as we work through different regions. But for the purpose of the demo and the training, it doesn't really matter too much. So first we're going to select a region. So as you know, if you just start typing, then the regions will appear. So I'm just going to select Sheffield. You can always select the drive time, quite a useful tool, and we'll try and jump into that on the next demonstration. You could select the radius from the address, so a radius from a college campus, or you could browse the local authority areas and so on. So I'm just going to run this now for Sheffield. So on the PowerPoint slide, we recommend that you do this for your broad region. So for example, I could look here at South Yorkshire and look at your local region, so look at Sheffield. Thinking about Ofsted and curriculum intent, obviously that says to understand local, regional and national needs. So what we're trying to do that is mirror that in our advice to be aware of what's happening locally, and a bit more broadly as well. So a couple of things before we move down into the data, a couple of useful tips. The green buttons up here, one we could go back to the setup screen. One, we could save this as a project, which would then save it in that top section of my home area. So what you'll find is that the reports that you use regularly, save that as a project, and then that saves you running that every time you go in there. And you can also export the report to Excel, PDF or Word And this report exports really nicely into that Word format, in case you're using that for your own training sessions or internal presentations and things. So looking at the economy overview, what I'm not going to do is talk through every bit of data on here. What I'm just going to do is share some of the key things and key insights to look at. So what you'll find here is that this narrative information at the top of the report is narrative which describes other data which appears lower down. So really we're just giving you this kind of takeaway information at the top. I always just like to have a look at this because it focuses your attention maybe where to look at when you get a little bit lower down. So we can see here for Sheffield, population in 2019. So just to reference that point again, when I changed the data run to 2020, that has now made it 2019 data as the base year. Whereas if we'd kept it on 2019 data, that would have been 2018 as the base year. So 585,243 people in the population in 2019. And this is telling us here in this narrative that the population grew in the last 5 years and is going to continue to grow in the next 5 years. In terms of total regional employment, jobs grew in the last 5 years and is going to grow in the next 5 years. But the first thing there that jumps out to me, and something which I want to look at in more detail when we get lower down, is the fact that we can see here that the population is going to grow faster than the total regional employment in the next 5 years. Clearly, in the current situation and COVID and the longer term impact to the economy, we're not considering that at this stage. I will try and cover that right at the end, but for the minute, you know, that's not having an impact on the longer term data. So we're not going to worry about that too much at this stage. And average wages for the Sheffield area. Another little useful tip some people often miss: if you click on the little 3 dots, then you can actually download that image and just paste it straight into a presentation or report that you're working on. So again, not to talk through all these key takeaways, one thing that I always flag is to look at the top 3 industries. So this is showing us the top 3 industries in 2019. So top 3 industries for Sheffield: hospital activities, tertiary education and primary education. The reason why I like to always try and flag this is that for those of you who work with your LEP or local government officers and things, they will often talk about the aspirational needs of the economy. So they'll talk about what they want the economy to look like in the future, not necessarily what it looks like right now. But for a lot of us big general FE colleges, we need to pay close attention to this, because these are the biggest industries by people employed in them in 2019. So we still need to make sure that we're serving those as well. So labour force breakdown, we can then see the total working age population and so on down into those employed and unemployed and under 16 and over 64. Educational attainment is a relatively new section of data in this report. So if you've not seen it, if it's the first time you've been in here for a little while, I urge you to get into it and have a look around. So the educational attainment level is doing exactly what it says on the tin there. So here we can see in Sheffield, we've got 35.7% of people with degree equivalent or above. And we tend to find that where we have a university that is quite a higher level. But again, get into there and look at that in your particular region, understand what opportunities that might bring to you. Demographics, I'm not going to go through in too much detail, but we can come back to that if anybody has any particular questions. So what I really want to do is get into this section here. So want to start and unpack this a little bit more, look at population trends and look at jobs. This is where that narrative came from, right up at the top. So we can just see here this in a bit more of a graphical format. So for Sheffield, out to 2024 now, the projection is that the population is going to continue to grow. So a nice upward trajectory there. But if we actually then look at jobs, and as this refreshes, you'll start to see that although it's a nice steady incline, but it's just starting to plateau slightly. As you'll know, in other parts of the tool, we can get into a projection to 2028. So it'd be interesting to see if that actually just does start to flatline. And clearly the takeaway there is there's going to be more people in the economy than employment is growing by. So that's worth considering as a starting point. So I urge you to look at your own areas and understand this. Remember, look at your very local area. So if we looked at this as a wider area as well, so looked at South Yorkshire, that might have a different trajectory. So it's worth understanding the wider markets, often people will travel outside of that very local area, and that's the reason why we sure to do that. For those of you with Analyst, always note where these blue hyperlinks are. You can jump into the detailed data on that, and you can also jump into the industry table, which again will show you more data around that particular slide. Next into population characteristics. So here we give the UK average at the top on this little rainbow chart. So we can see here for Sheffield as a higher proportion of millennials than the UK average, a lower proportion of retiring soon, and a higher proportion of racial diversity. Next into the industry characteristics, I'm just going to skip through this table because the chart below actually shows it in a nicer, more graphical way. Just a note to point out, in a future release of the economy overview report, this actual table will be being replaced, and we're going to get into a little bit more detail in terms of how we present this chart below. So keep an eye out for that coming in the future. So next off, we're going to look at industries in this table. I'm just going to click into growth. Clearly, you can spend more time looking at the jobs employed in those industries, and we can also look at growth, LQ, GVA, and wages. I'm just going to talk through a couple of these in a bit more detail. So the kind of things we're looking from here, and the reason why I say to start off with economy overview is we're trying to get a feel here for the questions we want to ask when we get into other parts of the tool. And this is a nice way to look at the data and get a broad feel for what's happening in a region. So in the reports in economy overview, you'll tend to see that the data is at a SIC 1 or SIC 2 category, so it's a quite a high level. And the reason why we do that, as I say, is to get you thinking about what's happening quite broadly. So here we can see that the top growth industries, so this is between 2013 and 2018, the top growth industry in Sheffield has been professional, scientific, or technical activities. Now that is quite a broad area. So what we'd straight away be thinking there is, okay, my next step would be to try and find out what's driving that growth, because there will be you know, a more granular level of detailed industry that's driving that growth within the economy. Second, arts, entertainment and recreation. Third, accommodation and food service, and fourth, transport and storage. So next, we're just going to look at LQ. So LQ stands for location quotient. Location quotient is showing you the concentration of something in the area that you're looking at. So we're looking at Sheffield, we're looking at industries. So this is showing you the concentration of industries within Sheffield. So the line here is 1. You see right down to the bottom there. The grey line is 1. 1 is always the national average. So basically we're saying that anything on this right-hand side of the line, anything that goes beyond that line that breaks it, there is a higher concentration of that in Sheffield than there is in other parts of the UK. So those tend to be areas of specialism. They tend to be areas which we say to look at, to concentrate on, because those could be things which set you apart to other areas of the country. So clearly we've got education at the top, no major surprise there with a college and 2 large universities. We've then got arts and entertainment and recreation, human health and social work, and manufacturing. So manufacturing I'd expect to be on there, probably with education and human health. Arts is possibly a bit of a surprise for those of you who know the Sheffield area. And again, that's something then which we would take away and look at in more detail further down the line. Again, we can jump to these detailed tables if we want to. So just a quick recap of that, 'cause it's a useful metric. Location quotient, LQ, you'll see it mentioned several times within the tool. And it's giving you the concentration of the thing that you are looking at. So in this instance, we're looking at industries. So these are the areas of particular specialism. So that section was looking at industries. Next, we're going to look at occupations. So this is workforce characteristics. We're now looking at the workforce, not the industries. Again, we've got the same format here. We can look at jobs, we can look at growth, LQ, and so on. So here we're looking at the largest occupation group in terms of jobs. Again, this is it's a 1-digit SOC code, so we can see the professional grouping is the highest. To note there, we've got the little grey bar which denotes the national average. So this would show us that Sheffield has a higher proportion than the national average of the professional occupation grouping. And second down there, we have elementary. Now, for those of you with the Analyst Tool, I'd urge you to look at the the occupation table and check out the automation index. There's, as you may have seen from our webinars, we now break the automation index down for every SOC code. The reason why I'm just kind of pausing on that there is because elementary occupations and skill trades tend to be the ones with the highest automation index score, which means that the tasks performed by those occupations are at highest risk. So what we're not saying is that the number of jobs are going to change there in the future. What we're saying is that the types of skills needed by those jobs will be different. So if you do have full analysts, get into that the automation index and have a look at that. Certainly, I'm just going to make a note, and we'll try and have a look at that in a bit more detail if we get time at the end of the session. So we're looking from largest occupations. We then skip across to growth, and we can see that in the last 5 years, the biggest growth has been professional occupations and admin and secretarial and elementary. So again, really broad level. What we want to find out here is, well, which professional occupations, but what we're just trying to do at first is give you that steer, get you thinking about really broadly what's happening. So we can see here that professional followed by admin and secretarial have been the biggest growing over the last 5 years. So the reports that we've looked at so far, the data we've looked at so far has all been based on structured government data. It's all data which we update annually as part of that big data run, and it's all information which comes from government and is in that SIC and SOC code structure. What we're now going to look at is in-demand skills. So in-demand skills comes from our job posting data. So we scrape thousands of job boards and then aggregate that data together to give you the analytics based on this job posting data. So we can see here that the top hard skills in Sheffield, when we get into job posting data later, we'll also look at common skills, but we're just looking at hard skills here compared to the national average. We can see that the top hard skill advertised in job postings in Sheffield in the last 12 months was accounting, followed by auditing, and then agile software development is booming up there as well. Now, what I always what I always try and do is almost just to give you some insight, is to kind of mentally group these into clusters of skills. So clearly within accounting, we've got some auditing in there as well, and possibly even KPIs could fit into that. And forecasting, so they're all skills which tend to suggest that there's going to be a strong financial need within this area. We can also then see that we've got agile software development, and we've got SQL as a programming language and JavaScript. So that would tell us that those kind of digital technology skills, those are on the increase in that Sheffield area as well. So it doesn't always work out like that, but clearly, you know, just from that bit of quick analysis, we could see probably 2 emerging markets in there that we're going to see as we work through in more detail, but certainly worth understanding that and seeing if there's those shapes and clusters of skills come through in your area. The other thing to note on here is business development and selling techniques. From our work in the last 12 months, we certainly see this appearing a lot. And for those of you who don't focus on business development and selling techniques as one of the core skills that you deliver as part of maybe your tutorial program or as part of your study programs, then I'd really urge you to think about that, because those are certainly in-demand skills and they're just good common skills, good employability skills for the region. So skills demand by quarter takes the last 4 quarters of the year and just shows us how those skills, demand has changed over time. So if we just pick one of these, such as auditing, we can see that's gone from top place in December 18, and it's gone on a bit of a downward curve then into the middle part of 2019, and it's now surging back up to the top. The reason why I just pause on this slide is often just to make the point that whilst the ordering of them changes, we can probably see here that most of those top 10 have been the top 10 for some time. It's just that the ordering of them changes maybe over the year period. Forecasting there is taking a bit of a downward curve, but looking at the others, so SQL was an interesting one. SQL is been on the up in the middle of 2019 again, has dropped again, but you know, certainly have a look at that, see if there's things that the insight that you can gain from how those skills change over time over that period. So that's the first report in Course Vision. That's the economy overview. As I said, we always recommend start off in there straight away. Just from talking through that, we've seen a couple of things that we'd want to unpack in a bit more detail. Certainly what's driving that professional growth. We'd certainly want to look at more at job posting data and see how those skills are panning out into more micro level clusters within maybe particular sectors, particular industries, and understand that in more detail. I'm just going to pause for a second there and see if there's any questions that come through on that particular report before we move on. Okay, so nothing come through us yet, so we'll... Sorry? Hello?
But I don't have any, so it's fine. Carry on.
Okay, thanks, Debbie. So next we're going to move from economy overview into curriculum overview. So the first thing to point out on here in curriculum overview is this is where you upload your educational institutions data. So if you've not done that recently, then please let me know and we can arrange for that to be uploaded. So basically here we take your completion data. So this is just dummy data, some dummy data in my tool. If you're looking in your tool, it will be your should be our up-to-date data for the last completed academic year. So we can upload multiple data sets in here. You could upload all your course data. Some colleges split that down by campus, some split it out by apprenticeships. Here, just on this dummy data, you can see there we've done that in this way. So split out by apprenticeships, all FE courses, September enrollments, and so on. So I'm just going to pick this full data for 17-18. I usually suggest upload all the data. Look at what that tells us, and then maybe look at splitting it down into a few more bite-sized chunks. So we've uploaded that data. As a reminder, if you've not uploaded that recently, then please get in touch with us and we can arrange for that to be done. We're then going to pick the area again, so we're going to select that area to map against. Just for consistency here, I'm just going to keep with Sheffield just for the time being. Again, don't forget you could select by a drive time or a radius from an address, or you could select a different area. We can also limit by the course area that we want to compare this against. I'm just going to select all for the time being, and then we'll drill into this in a bit more detail within the report. So I'm just going to run that now. So to note as we get into here, a couple of useful things to remember. First is if you make any adjustments to this, if you filter anything down the left-hand side, you can always save the project, save you doing that work again, and you can always export. If on the left-hand side you decide that you want to add in a different area, so let's just say we decide that we want to add in Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham, we could do that in there as well. We can filter by the educational level. We can filter the time frame. So if we wanted here to set the base year as 2019, we could then set the projection year to 2028. And we could also filter out whether we wanted in employed organizations or whether we want proprietaries, so self-employed and so on in there as well. So we're just going to keep all that in there for so I'll just leave Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham in there. So a couple of things here. We can either view this by the view SSA, which is what I think Ofsted still tend to work in. We'll just choose the MZ course area for the time being. So what we've done here is group together the relevant occupations into what we feel are pretty sensible course areas. So what we can see here, just working across the data, if we look at medicine and dentistry as an example up here at the top, what we're saying here is base data. Looking at this would be your own course data. So this would be the number of completions you had in the last academic year compared to the annual openings for those positions in that grouping, so medicine and dentistry. So we've got a large variance there. Now the thing that we're trying to show here is some basic supply and demand. So we could see there if this was real data, and the annual openings, by the way, this is real data, it's just the completions which is dummy data. If this was a real data for Sheffield, we could see here that the labour market could stand us putting more trained people in there because we're not offering as many completed students, not putting as many students with a completed programme. into the economy as what it would stand, because there's quite a lot of annual openings there. That also works the other way around as well. I'm just looking if we've got an example in this data to show you. So if we looked at something like security as an example, clearly works the other way around as well. So here we've only got 284 annual openings, yet we've put 269 people into the economy. Now, a couple of caveats there. What we're not saying is just because a student has completed a course doesn't mean say they're going to be suitable to fill that one of those openings. But what we're trying to do is give you that headline level, and if nothing else, get into some more research, get into a more granular level of understanding about that area. Clearly, if it's as tight as what this would be, then you'd want to really understand that to think, is there something we should be doing maybe to not put as many students into that marketplace, or do we know that there's more growth coming and we can sustain that demand? So here we're looking, in summary, we're looking for areas of undersupply and areas of oversupply, and we can see that by looking at completions versus annual openings and looking at the variance. Just a little tip there, some people tend to look at the percentage. I always say, look at the actual number as well as the percentage, because sometimes the numbers are so small, the percentage is skewed. Whereas actually we'll probably just want to be looking at the numbers there and use the percentage as a secondary measure to kind of reinforce that. And what we've also done here as well, because we changed that filter, we've got that projection out to 2028. So we can see, as well as the jobs in 2019, we can see what that increase is likely to be in the future. So whether that growth is still going to come through. So that's the curriculum overview is a nice way just to take that helicopter view of mapping your curriculum, your completion data against annual openings. As I said, the next step then, what we want to do is get into this in a bit more detail and make it a bit more relevant by looking at it as a curriculum area in more detail. So there's a couple of ways we can do this. I'm going to just quickly show you both. One, we could go back to the Course Vision tool, and we could then go into the course area snapshot report. So remember, we're going through these in a logical sequence. We started off economy overview, curriculum overview. We could then go into course area snapshot, and we could search for the area that we're interested in. The other way is from that curriculum overview report. So just to head back into here, again, we'll just keep the same data selection. So we've got Sheffield, Barnsley, Doncaster. So we're looking at openings in that region. And we're looking at all course areas. What we could do is look for an area that interests us. So let's just say, for example, we want that to be health and social care. So you might be head of health and social care. We might want to add in nursing in there as well, because that's very similar to health and social care. We might want to also add in pharmacy and dentistry, because they are similar as well. Now, you don't have to put all these areas in. You could just look at one. But what I always suggest is look down this list and make sure that you pull in all the relevant areas first. So it might be that health and social care is as broad as you want to go right now, but you might just want to start off by bolting all these areas in and then refine it from within the report. So I'm just going to pick two for now. So I've picked two that interest me, and what I want to do then is I'm going to jump to course area snapshot. So you can see that's a way then, without coming back out and going into the main menu, I can just jump straight across into this snapshot. So we've here, just a reminder of what we're looking at. So the filters on the left-hand side, we've got nursing, we've got health and social care. We've got Sheffield, Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham. We've got the time frame we selected, and we've got both class of worker, employed and proprietary. So what we're going to do now is just run through the headline data on this report and what it's telling us. Again, remember, if you're going to run these kind of things regularly, you might have tweaked this left-hand side. You might have got a data set which works well for you. Just save that project, and that will appear in your home area. So from course area snapshot, we can see here that the summary for these two areas has got good jobs in 2019, 18% above the national average. And there's a 0.21% increase out to 2028, and that's tracking just below the national average of 2.6%. So what we can see here as a snapshot is good current employment and a good projected employment numbers for those two occupations. Decent median wage compared to the national average. We then show you the occupations that we've associated with these chosen course areas, and that's why it's useful just to put all the relevant ones in there initially. And some of these won't be relevant to your curriculum area. Think about this as a little bit broader than a curriculum area. What we're trying to show you is what's happening, what we think is happening in that broader industry. We're not always going to get it exactly aligned to your curriculum area. Just to note again, in the next release of Analyst, which will be coming, so we're currently working on a tool called FE Analyst. This will be a version of Analyst just for the FE sector. So please keep an eye out for that coming soon. What you'll be able to do in here is once you've built this grouping, you'll be able to actually edit this yourself. So let's say, for example, social worker wasn't relevant to you, you'll be able to take that out of the list, so and refine that as you go. So please keep your eyes out for that coming soon. We then jump from that into completion. So this would show you your actual completions. So this would be your courses and your course completions. So again, what you can do is make that link in a bit more intuitive way. When you tend to look at that curriculum overview, you've got everything in there. But if you're the head of this area, if you're doing more want to look at more insights around health and social care with the the relevant head of academy, then you can, or head of faculty, whatever you guys call them, these courses will be much more familiar, and you'll start to get a feel for how these courses map with these occupations and whether you're serving enough of these occupations with the courses that you're delivering. We can then look at the regional trends. So on here you've got the regional trend map. Again, we've got the region that we're selecting here, and we've got the national trend. What we could also do on here is add in other regions. So this we could add Leeds, which is just further up the road from Sheffield, and we could see on here that now we've added Leeds in onto this graph. We've got the little light blue triangle, and we can see how that is now tracking against nation and against our actual region. So to skip down, we can now see the regional breakdown. We can see where, because we've selected two regions, we selected Sheffield and Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham, we can see where the jobs are in those two regions. And we can now see at the bottom of this report the top industries employing those occupations. Now, one of the other tips we always advise is always think about industries and occupations. Some colleges we work with, certainly I've come across in the last 12 months, tend to have a preference to look at one or the other. Always look at both, because they will tell you slightly different things. So what we'll see here is that obviously, probably as you'd expect, hospital activities, employing the most people in there. But sometimes what you'll find in here, particularly when you're looking at things like engineering, computing, science, you tend to find that some of the occupations are actually working in industries you may not have thought about. So it's always worth considering that and getting that bit broader understanding. So from there, we've gone from course area snapshot. I'm just going to skip back into the course vision tool. So we've gone from economy overview, thinking about what's happening broadly in the economy, curriculum overview to get a sense of how our completion data maps with overall supply. So looking at that supply and demand data. We've then gone into course area snapshot, and then finally we'd work our way through into business case. So here what we can do is we can either search by course area. So if we could stick with health and social care as we just looked, we could type in engineering or construction. Just as a tip, what I always say is worthwhile doing before you actually start selecting an area is if you click on browse, what you can do here then is look at the list of course areas, or again you could change that back to sector subject area too. I'm just going to stick with course area. And what it's always useful to do is just to run through this and have a look at those groupings, because as I said, they're not strictly what your individual college course areas would be. These are MSI defined course areas where we've tried to make logical sense of that. But as an example, what you might want to do is group some of these things together. So don't just come to the first one as manufacturing and think, yeah, that will do. Just look through and make sure that there's no others which are going to be relevant to you. So construction is a good example of this. So if you're the head of construction, you might want to select construction, but you probably also want to select carpentry, bricklaying and plastering. maybe painting and decorating, and you might want to go through and, you know, construction management. So make sure you've got all those relevant course areas selected first, and you can just tick those and then select. So, you know, don't just think that you have to pick one. Pick the ones which are, you know, most broadly suit your area, and then if need be, you can always look at that broad area and then just deselect some of those from within the report, to make sure you get that level of analysis right. Again, we'll just stick with the same area, and we now get into this report. So we've got we're showing here, look, the 6 building and construction areas. These here on the left hand side. So as I said, if you just want to kind of deselect, you can just click on that little cross and that would take it out. Again, you can add and remove areas and change the time frames. Note on this report, we've got an extra time frame in here because we've now got the job postings. Because lower down, we're going to show some of the job posting data. You can adjust that time frame as well. So we could do that from within there, but I noticed that it was just showing me the last 12 months, so that's fine for purpose of the demo. So here now we can see, looking at these broad construction areas in the 2 Yorkshire unitary authorities, we've got 31,000 jobs in 2019, which is on par with the national average, and we can see that out to 2028, the projection is that there's going to be just under 1% growth, and that compares to a national average of just under 3%. So this report is trying to do a couple of things for us. One, it's trying to show us the future demand, trying to show us where whether we've got a solid demand right now in terms of the number of jobs, and the future demand for that industry based on our projection methodology. What we're also trying to do is we work lower down is show you the current demand by looking at job posting data. We can also see that here there's a strong amount of annual openings appear as well. What we then do is we show, and this is again the power of the EMSA data, is we get down right to a granular level, looking at the granular occupations which are making up this this growth. So this is a really interesting example that we've stumbled across here, because what we can see straight away is we've got some red and green. So whilst the position is relatively strong out to 2028, there's still going to be a big number of jobs. We can see that once we get into the weeds, we can see that some are actually performing better than others. And those of you who've heard me do sessions before, you know, I have to make the example that sometimes when you're talking to a LEP and they will say something like construction jobs are going to grow by 5% in Sheffield in the next 5 years. Well, that's interesting, but it's not really useful. What we want to be able to see is the particular occupations what are going to drive that growth. So here we can see as an example that carpenters and joiners are going to have good growth, forklift truck drivers are going to have good growth, but actually when you start to look at electrical fitters, that number is going to decrease slightly. Now again, word of caution with percentages and actual numbers, the actual numbers is still going to be a good amount. The percentage is relatively small in proportional terms, so just always be wary of that. What I just find is that the red and green is a nice way to trigger your eye to look at that in a bit more detail. And certainly when you get bigger percentages like this, glazes, window fabricators and fitters, pretty good percentage increase there, which would add a good number of jobs into that. If you click on the more button anywhere within the tool, you will see that we give you the long tail then, so you can see much more in terms of detail and looking at more occupations. But this is a really, really useful tool to get into the detail. Really start to think about here, how is your, so if you were looking at a construction curriculum, are you serving these occupations well? Are you serving the occupations which are going to increase? And what are you doing, what are you thinking about in terms of the areas which are on the decrease? So here, look, just getting into this detail, scaffolders and riggers, a significant increase there of 13%, but actually looking at painting and decorating, that's you're starting to get there quite a big decline. Also of note there, we put in the location quotient. Remember, we talked about that at the beginning. So that shows the concentration of these occupations in your area. So you can start to see how much of a concentration these occupations have. So here we can see that glaziers and window fabricators is already, there's a lot more of that occupation in Sheffield than there is elsewhere in the UK. Remember, 1 was the average, so here we're 11 points above that. So that shows that there's already a high concentration of those in this area, and it's going to continue to grow into the future based on that projection. So, you know, as I say, get into this, spend some time, look at it in more detail. Paints and decorators would be one I'd start to really look at. I'm hazarding a guess that, and we could do this looking at the occupation table. I would say that that's probably one at quite a high risk of automation. So that would be one certainly start thinking about for the future. What would the skills needed in painting and decorating look like in the future if that started to be impacted by automation? So moving through from that, we then put in the aggregate changes. So some nice little economic data here. This is particularly useful for things like bids and tenders, for if you were justifying provision for other courses, you know, for Ofsted and other maybe other regulatory bodies and things like that as well. As I say, particularly useful in bids and tenders. What we're showing here is that for every one job, or for every 100 jobs in the economy, in construction, we add another 0.79 or 179 jobs to the wider economy. And equally, for every £1, we had another 65p in terms of the wage multiplier. So it shows the value of the wider economy. So that could be, you know, other industries within the supply chain, but not directly construction. So that's a really nice way to show the value, particularly for those of you who might be interested in looking at things like sport, tourism, hair and beauty, where there might not be really strong job growth in the future. It gives you a good way to show some of that, you know, the impact of the economy. We then get into job posting data. So just to quickly skip back up to the top, we've gone from looking at what's happening right now, what's happening likely in the future, where that projection is, where that job growth and decline may come from, how the broader impact of the economy. We're then getting into the job posting data. So this is a really nice way to quickly see for those construction industries the number of unique postings. So 10,000 unique postings in these areas. We are going to look at job posting data in a bit more detail towards the end of the session. And the posting intensity of 4 to 1 basically means that every job on average is posted somewhere 4 times. So we want to look at the unique number, but each one of those unique jobs may be advertised in 4 different online locations. We then see the top companies posting for those jobs. Note when we're looking at quite a broad group in here is that there's a lot of recruitment agencies in there. We can actually filter those out if you wanted to by going into this company type and taking out the recruiters. I always suggest leaving them in for now and then taking them out. If you're using it for employer engagement purposes, you probably want to take out the recruiters and you want to get into more detail, actually looking at the actual employers. So if we look on here, what you will see is you'll see some local recruiters. So I know from knowing this patch that Elevation operates, I believe, largely in the South Yorkshire area, probably has a bit more of a national presence than that. But what you will do as well is you'll start to see, especially as you start to refine your search and just look at maybe one particular area, you'll start to see actual employers recruiting, and they are really good leads for your employer engagement teams. We can then look at the top job titles which are being posted. So we can see here that surveyors is the top posted job title in the last 12 months. It's appeared 895 times there as unique postings. And then we get into demand skills. So this is the really some really exciting data, and I'm just going to skip down to the actual the table here. This is getting some really exciting data, and probably where I'm spending most of my time working with colleges right now. So, you know, often people used to think that LMI using labour market information was going to uncover some, you know, some new exciting industry that you'd never heard of before, some great new opportunity. And whilst that still does happen occasionally, I think now that the really nuanced job posting data is where we're getting, you know, some significant insight. And it often means that changes don't have to be big. So if you think about it, you could be offering construction courses. We know that there's going to be a continued demand for construction, but actually we can see here the top skills which are being asked for within that industry. And again, this is a really good way to say, okay, well, are we covering these skills in our curriculum? So PP, probably so, that's going to be something that's you know, relatively embedded within construction, but then we've got electrical engineering, we've got surveying, AutoCAD, procurement, risk analysis, and so on. So it starts to give you a feel for, you know, whilst we're offering the qualification, are we doing enough to teach these skills, because these are what employers are asking for. So if we just look there at AutoCAD, it appeared 502 times in those job postings out of 10,000 jobs. It's a high proportion, you know, 5% of that. So certainly shows just how important that is. We can also then look at the common skills. I'm just going to skip past the data chart there and look at this actual table. We can see here that the top common skill management. So that gives us some indication of the types of level of qualification, level of occupation that's been sought after, and we can certainly get into more detail in the job post analytics. But really interesting there to see communications in second place. Construction is awareness of that construction industry, which is probably why that appears so high. But then we've got customer service. So straight away, again, think about how I kind of mentally clustered these on that first report. Communications and customer service, you know, very similar in terms of skills. Again, so thinking about this in a different way, these are not necessarily things which are skills which have to be taught in a curriculum. It's things how you teach them. So how do you teach those kind of customer service skills? They're not necessarily things that are going to come up high on a construction qualification, but they're really important to the economy. So how do you teach those communication skills? How do you get students communicating with each other, with their employers, with their peers, with staff? How do you get them doing maybe things like presentation skills? How do you improve those communication skills and customer service skills? Because they are clearly really important. Just looking at the proportion, so communication appeared 874 times in searches, more than actual PPE or electrical engineering. So it shows you the importance of communication as a skill. We've also got here as well problem solving, and we've got detail oriented, so that attention to detail. So again, starts to show the importance of those softer skills, those common skills to the broader construction industry, as well as those technical skills. So, you know, to reiterate, don't just think about this as adding new courses, think about it as modifying the courses that you have. I know that often colleges will, you know, will buy a qualification off the shelf from City and Guilds or whatever awarding body you're using, and people will say, we can't change these too much. But, you know, don't, as I said, don't necessarily think about the actual qualification itself. Think about how you teach them these things. How you teach problem solving, you know, can be applied right the way across whatever qualification you may be teaching. You know, so getting people in situations where they're solving a problem together, that could be applied whether you're teaching hair and beauty or mechanical engineering. So in a nutshell, that brings us to the end of the course vision section. And you'll see there why we choose that to start from. Whether you're analyst or course vision, we choose that to start from because it takes you in a really logical way from a very headline overview right the way through to more detail about a particular course area. Now, the added advantage of analyst is that you can get into much more detail for certain sections. So you can start to really jump into more micro level detail to answer some of your questions. So I'm just going to give you an example of how we can do that. So if you're in business case, for example, it might be that, so we were just in there looking at construction. So I'm just going to choose that again. What we might want to do while we're in business case, if you're an analyst user, you'll see that these occupations are actually highlighted in blue. So let's just go down to the ones we picked on. I think it was scaffolders had a pretty good. Yes, I've obviously only selected this time construction. Before I'd selected 4 or 5 different construction curriculum areas. But just to look at scaffolding again, so a really good growth projection out there. So what I might want to do is click on that link, and that will then take me into a detailed occupation overview for construction. So this is where the advantage of having full analyst over course vision. Course vision gives you a really good level of detail, certainly gives you a great level of detail, support curriculum planning, marketing strategy, curriculum strategy. But with analyst, you can just jump into that bit deeper level detail. So here you can see we're looking at an occupation overview, so a deep dive just on scaffolders, stagers and riggers in those 2 Yorkshire areas. We can then see the jobs in 2019, the projection out to 2028, so phenomenal growth there, projection, and the hourly wage. Again, we've got the regional trends that we can plot. So we can see where the jobs are going to be. So we can see that the jobs are largely going to be Barnsley, Rotherham, Doncaster, not in Sheffield, which may surprise you to look at that. We get the job posting overview, and then we get the detail about the gender breakdown, age breakdown of this industry, sorry, of this occupation. We see the job claimant count, so we can see in the last few months how many people have from Job Centre have claimed which had this occupation as their last known occupation. And again, we can see the industries employing scaffolders. So other specialised construction activities, and then some other industries, but really tiny compared. So you can see that this is really where that occupation is predominantly employed. And again, if we wanted to go into more detail about that, we could click on the industry and we could jump then into more detail. So you can see the added advantage straight away there of Analyst. So we go from that broad overview of the data and being able to jump into much more granular level detail. So here we can see we're looking now an industry overview of other specialised construction activities. And we can certainly work down that same level of information then. So I'm not going to talk through this in much detail. The principles are the same. You've got the filters here on the left hand side to be able to filter those reports, and you can work through the data as we've seen. So you've gone from looking at those broad questions of, well, what might be driving this growth, what might be driving this decline. You can then get into a more granular level of detail to really drive that insight of your college. So one thing I just wanted to just take you through in a bit more detail is job post analytics. So just to point out there, so we were in Course Vision, we've gone through those reports. If I'd have saved any projects, this is where they would appear. If I'd bookmarked any reports, this is where they would appear. Just to show you somewhere else where we've just been. So obviously we jumped out of Course Vision into an occupation overview. If you were an Analyst user, you would find that in the occupation section. So just to show you there how that works. So that PowerPoint slide I put up at the beginning where we jump from Course Vision into different areas of Analyst, that's where we would be. So occupation table is where I mentioned the automation indexes. I'm not going to take through that now, but you can easily select that in the occupation table and look at the impact we see technology having on those occupations. But what I wanted to do is just take you through a bit more detail in job postings. So we're just going to have 5 or 10 minutes looking at this, and then I'm going to finish off by quickly showing you the work that we're doing around COVID and the impact that might have on our economies. And if we get time, just show you the infograph tool as well. So looking at job postings, so a new feature that's just been added to job postings. Those of you who've not been in for a week or two will see some new data in here, particularly in the job posting table. So I'm just going to show you a couple of new things in job posting analytics, and then we're going to get into the job posting table. So again, we'll stick this same region. One thing to point out on here, which people often overlook, is the fact that you can search by companies, and that will tell you the skills and jobs that specific companies are looking for. So in Sheffield, it might be that you want to select a particular construction company and look at their hiring picture over the last 12 months or so. You can also select by skills. So if you just didn't want to look at all the jobs, you could. So we saw on there that one of the in-demand skills was something like JavaScript. So on here, we could select all the occupations which have been advertised, which are looking for Java programming languages. And that gives you a nice way to slice the data. What I'm going to do for the minute is just run all jobs. So this is looking at all online job postings in Sheffield, Barnsley, Doncaster, Rotherham in the last 12 months or so. So here we can see 169,000 unique jobs, posting intensity of 5:1, which is where we get the total number of postings from. So relatively new data in here, just appeared in the last few weeks, is median salary. So what this is showing is that 63% of the jobs had a salary. So not all jobs carry a salary, and so that 28k is based on the 63% of those advertised vacancies. But we can start to see here, look, the how many of each salary banding that we have, which is useful to see. We can see the breakdown, so that Sheffield has more jobs, online jobs advertised in the period we selected than Barnsley. We then give you the sample postings still, but nice little feature here now, as well as looking at the monthly profile, you can also see the last 30 days. So you can start to see how the job posting market is changing. What you'll start to see here as the data comes through is the significant impact in the last few days of COVID-19, certainly having a significant impact on the number of job posting activity into the last few days of March. Just to note here on the left-hand side, there's lots of different filters, lots of ways you can filter this. I always say start off with everything and then work your way through and take out anything that you may think. So here we could filter by specific occupations, specific companies. We could take out, we could look at salary ranges. We could look at whether jobs are permanent or apprenticeships. No, a big word of caution here is we only know that it is one of these types if it's specified in the data. So a bit like the salary data where we're saying that there's only 63% of salaries, there may be a similar percentage will say whether it's permanent or temporary. So you're never going to get all of the data. We're bound on what data is actually in there. So new feature there just to point out. Companies who are hiring, we've got that in as usual. The link here back to the top occupations which are hiring. So again, those of you who are full analyst can jump from bookkeepers. You could go into a detailed occupation overview and see just what's happening there. So just to point out here, and one of the things I always show you to look for is, so bookkeepers and payroll managers, the average posting duration, I think up at the top was something like 30 or 31 days. For bookkeepers, it's 20 days, which indicates that those jobs are probably filling quite quickly in the region that we're looking at. Programmers, 17 days, so that would suggest that they are filling really quickly. Now that low posting duration doesn't mean so that the job's being filled, but it's probably a strong indication that it is. Whereas when we look at van drivers and care workers, they are higher median posting durations. Certainly from an employee engagement perspective, I'd be looking at the companies who are hiring, the ones where they've got high posting durations, get into those first for a discussion. And again, we get down into the detailed skills data within there. So as you know, we can then start to filter this by different occupations, and that's certainly where I'd suggest starting off from a training perspective. If you want to get into this into more detail, look at some of those broad groupings we'd looked at earlier. So look at construction as a group, and then work your way down into a more detailed occupation grouping. And the way you do that is, so to look at occupations, click on advanced and look at groups. Always look at what groups are being created, because there's always some useful groupings in there. So here is an example. We could click on construction occupations or construction scenes group. So there we've mapped construction occupations aligned to the relevant construction T level. So if we just pick on their construction occupations, what that's going to do is pick 27 occupations. So rather than you going through manually selecting those, it's picked 27 relevant construction occupations for you to start from. You could then work your way through that list and take out the ones that you may be interested in or not interested in, and then you've got a good view of the job posting activity for the construction industry. So just to skip down to the skills, we could then see the top hard skills for construction, and we could see the top common skills for construction. So some really useful insight there to work your way through. Just to show you in the job posting table, because this is something which is new. So what you'll see in the job posting table, this is coming through now with the latest 2020 data set. So you see there we've still selected the same area. Again, you could search by different occupations, companies, qualifications. What I just want to draw your attention to is clicking this unique postings and daily postings. So if you just make sure those two boxes, those two circles, sorry, are selected, and then run the report, what that allows us to then do, just wait for the data to load. What we can then do is look at the latest day posting, or we could look at that, we could change it to be the last 7 days as an example. So all we do there is make sure that you've got the relevant column added. So you'd select that column, so you'd search for that, make sure that if it's not showing in your table, click on add or remove column, make sure you've got that latest day or latest 7 days. What you can see then is, so I'm looking here at, so you could look at this by job title or occupation. The majority of people wanting to get this level of detail and look at the last few days are using it for employer engagement. So looking at it for warm leads, for employer engagement, or for work placement, looking for work placement vacancies. So if these people are hiring, they're hiring relatively, you know, now, so in the last few days. So they probably have a strong indication that they have a skills need of some kind. And whether you could fill that with an apprenticeship or with a work placement. So we're looking in the company tab. We're looking at the last people who've posted in the last few days. So if we click on that, that will then reorder that by the highest number at the top. So we can see here, so apologies here in Anonymous Yorkshire, a bit of a data issue that will be ironed out in the next few days. But what we can see here is that Hayes have advertised 286 vacancies online in the last day. AdView, Elevation Recruitment Group, Teaching, Academics, Quality Service Recruitment. So you can start to work through these and see who are advertising those jobs. And this is where then, as I say, from an employer engagement perspective, from work placement perspective, you could really get into these and start to talk them, you know, as a really warm lead. What you can also do in here as well is you could click on the actual company, and you could jump into then more detail into the analytics just on that company. So if we just get into there, I think the one I selected, I think was University of Sheffield. So we're now just looking at that one company. So advertised in these 2 locations. University of Sheffield have advertised 1,666 jobs. What this does, it gives you really good insight then. So just scrolling down, it will tell you the top occupations that they're looking for. So again, if you were going to have a conversation with this university, so from an employer engagement perspective, you know that the top occupations they're looking for are research professionals, followed by further ed teaching professionals, which is interesting for university, top posted job titles, and then the top skills that they're looking at. So these are the top hard skills, so material science, psychology, advanced manufacturing, the top hard skills that they're looking at, and then the top common skills. So you can use this as a really good way to get an understanding of an industry, an understanding of an organization before you go in and have a conversation with them. As I say, whether that's from a business development perspective or whether it's from a perspective of helping them with their training needs, you can have a really good idea of what they're looking at. So a couple of things I just want to finish off on. I hope that's given people a good insight in terms of course vision and analyst. These sessions are intended to be an overview. If there are things that you want to look at in more detail, then please let us know. We can always pick those up one-to-one or in small groups, or it can help how we shape things for future webinars. I just wanted to point you to the work that we're now doing around COVID-19. So this is publicly available on our website. So we now have the COVID-19 dashboard. So we're getting lots of questions about what impact will this have on the data, on our structural data, and you know, for now we're saying, you know, that things have not gone on long enough to have an impact on that, but clearly the longer it goes on into the future, it may have an impact. So what we want to do is start to show you how we're starting to think through this and show the changes. So here we can see this is updated daily. We can see that as of now, 19,000 cases in the UK. So what we're showing on this graph here is the impact of job postings. So the green line is 2019, so relatively buoyant job postings, and we can see there where that drops off a cliff in 2020. We can see here that, for example, that since the 7th of March, there have been 231,000 less job postings across the UK, and then we're looking at the areas which are most affected by that. And other things you can see on here are things like the jobs which are still recruiting. So as you'd expect, large goods, vehicles and drivers, food and drink, tobacco process operatives are the ones which are really recruiting right now. No surprise there based on supermarkets. And the ones which are negatively impacted by those by the crisis that we find ourselves in. So please keep looking at that. It's giving you some really good insight as to the impact that we're facing in the very short term. What you can also do, you may have noticed when I went onto this website, and we'll share this the link afterwards, is that you can actually subscribe there and get your own local cut of this data. So you, as we do generally with our thought leadership pieces, you can get what's happening in your locality. So please have a look at that and start to understand what that may do in the future, and start to get that insight right now. The main thing from our perspective is, you're knowing how you work as colleges, you'll want to be on top of this when we come out on the other side. However long that may be, you'll want to be on the front foot, know what impact this has had in your area, know what jobs are starting to recruit again, right? Quickest, what skills are being looked for, and that will then help to help your local economy get back on track. Final thing I just wanted to show you really quickly. So some of you already have access to this. This is something that we're getting asked for a lot. So it's a tool called Engage. This is something that because now there are no open days, there are no schools engagement sessions, many of you will know we have our career coach tool. This is a form of the career coach tool which actually uses let me just jump back out of it for a second. Sorry, I just need to change the data year. So this is a tool which we use to quickly generate infographics. So this is a really nice way, if you don't already have this tool, we can add it in for you relatively easily. Really nice way to create engaging social media content. We're all going to have to be creative about how we engage with students now remotely. I've already spoke to colleges which have had a 75% reduction on applications in the last month alone. So we're going to have to come up with creative ways to reach out, to engage online with the absence, as I say, of open days and things like schools engagement sessions. So this tool is a nifty little way to create some nice social media content. It can also be used in content for your websites, for blog posts, for leaflets and other things that you might be doing. So all what you do is select an occupation that you're interested in. So just to note here, because we've used these two regions, it's remembered those from elsewhere in the tool. So bookkeepers was one which was I remember as being a pretty good growth, so that might be one that we focus on. So I could select bookkeepers there. We've got our region, and what that's going to do now is pull me some really nice information through, some really nice clear infographic information based on that occupation in these areas. So what we could do is we could say, okay, we want to show this is going to be a good number of jobs for bookkeepers. So for colleges which have maybe financial qualifications, things around business finance, you might want to make this link and show that you have courses in this area, and there's going to be a good projection in the future. In here you can change the time frame, so we could change it to 2027, and we could change the chart color to blue, for example, and then add it to our infograph. And you can select up to 3 images for your infograph, or just 1. And from here, again, you could do more changing on the style. So we could change the colors, we could change the text, and so on. And then we can just export that really easily. So a few clicks, we could export that and put it in social media. So, thinking about, we'll get different ways of remote working. We've not all got access to designers. This is just a nice way to keep some nice engaging social media content, still really robust labour market data aligning to your curriculum areas. We've shared some nice examples on this recently on things like Twitter and LinkedIn. Craven College was one really nice way to show how their provision aligns to job demand in the agricultural space up there in North Yorkshire. So please, if you want to have a look at this in a bit more detail, then let myself or Carla know, and we can talk you through that. So that's all I was going to cover for today. If we've just got a few minutes left, if anybody has any questions, please pop them in now. If Debbie, if you're still on the line, if anybody's submitted any questions so far, or if anybody wants to put any questions through, then please do so now.
We haven't got any at the moment, so obviously you did a good job, John.
Yeah, okay. But yeah, as I said, these sessions are always intended to be an overview. Because they're open sessions, we have people with such a a diverse range of experience using our products. Hopefully you've picked up something new today. If there's something you want to look at in more detail, then please just drop me a line afterwards, and we can arrange to cover that off. But we've no questions come through, so please stay well, stay safe, keep in touch with us. We are in a difficult situation, but we will come through the other side, I'm sure. You know, at MZ, we're all used to working remotely. We all work from home anyway. So if you do need any more detailed support, then we're here and willing to do that. But so take care and look forward to speaking to you again soon.